All right, now to our first conversation. We see data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows in the second quarter of 2024, total capital importation into Nigeria stood about $2.6 billion, higher than the $1 billion, about $1 billion recorded in the second quarter of 2023, indicating about a 152% increase in compared to the preceding quarter. But looking closer at the sectors, we see oil and gas attracted a share of about 0.19%. That's about $5 million. Power, that's electricity, got about 1% of that at $26 million. And now we see Nigerians having to pay more for PMS and also electricity. Shout out to the Band A consumers. Join us now to discuss more. We have Temitope Kolade, is a senior manager, oil and gas and power at Anderson. Great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
Yeah, Kolade. But Kolade, can I ask you a personal question?
Yeah, sure.
When last did you buy fuel?
When last? Maybe about 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. Wow. So that means you're not experiencing this new surge, because my fuel is down right now, but I'm afraid to go to the pumps because I don't know what I'm gonna spend. I don't know if you can hear me, Kolade. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Fantastic. So I said I'm afraid to go to the pumps. I don't have much fuel, but I'm afraid to go to the pumps right now because I feel like I might be spending everything, to fill up my tank.
I doubt you have an option.
Yeah, I feel like I might get my bicycle at this point, Kolade. But you know what? Let's look at this data, for the second quarter. Oil and gas getting less than 1% of the total capital importation into Nigeria in the second quarter. How are you seeing this number?
Sorry, Ladi, I'm losing you.
Yeah, so I'm saying the data now. Let's look at the data. The second quarter data, we've seen oil and gas, that industry just attracting about 1% of the total capital importation for the second quarter. How are you seeing that number?
Abysmal, because apparently what we've gathered is that for the oil and gas industry, particularly the upstream sector, to deliver at the 2 million barrels per day that we expect, we need about $20 to $25 million annually to get into that sector. And what we're seeing, it's not anywhere close to it. Apparently the government is doing quite a lot. When you think about it, there is a couple of policies that have been issued here and there, fiscal policies, how to make business easier for people who do business within the sector, how to ensure that, we get some speed in terms of the investment that you get through the local content and all of those. Unfortunately, those are not just the things that need to be done. It appears that we are trying to recover from very many years of non-investment within the sector because of the sort of delay that the PIA got before it came into force. And it looks like we're just trying to play catch up, and there is there is the need for a renewed strategy to get people to invest into the oil and gas sector in Nigeria.
All right, so looking at where we are right now with the oil and gas industry, would you say, give an estimate of how many years of not doing the right thing, got us to this point? Like, would you say as back as 40 years, or is it a recent development of activities that's leading us to what we're seeing right now in our oil and gas industry?
It's more than 10 years. You recall that the PIA, for instance, the Petroleum Industry Act, took a very long time, more than 10 years to eventually get passed in 2021. That's on the one side. We also took the plan to begin to divest. The international oil companies, the IOCs, began to divest at some point, and between 2010 and 2022, about 20 assets were divested into the hands of the indigenous players. Unfortunately, some of these things happen, and the people don't have the funds to really drive the investment within that sector. And so you see they're sitting on the asset, they're not optimizing it. About 15 people, 15 companies took those 20 assets, but they've not done so much about those assets that they've gotten. So it's a number of years, and it's coming to that point where it may be necessary to begin to apply the provision of drill or drop that is contained in the Petroleum Industry Act, where you just say you can't sit on this asset for too long, you've got to develop it. Sometimes you complain about vandalism, we complain about crude theft, but again, there are assets that you see people have the licenses, but they're not operating them. They're looking for funds here and there because, again, the processes that led to acquiring those assets in the first place were not maybe transparent enough. These people didn't show that they had the funds to drive the process.
Right, and at this point, it's you're recommending drill or drop. That's what's contained in the PIA. So if that happens, if most of these licenses that are not operating, if they're actually dropped, at this point, what's the process, for that?
Well, the process is very simple. The NUPRC in itself would have to get into that process and ensure that if you're dropping those assets, you get new investors. There are conditionalities in the agreements that were signed with the potential operators before, and they would have to go through all of the conditions and clauses in the agreements to ensure that they're not losing so much by dropping those, but we have people who are qualified, people who have the funds to drive it. Again, because what you see within the oil and gas sector is a capital-intensive project that typically have to be run. It doesn't take a very short time to get to market. And so sometimes people don't even have the sort of experience to run it, but somehow they get those licenses. And if they drop it, you can be sure that if we have the right sweetness, like some of the policies that we now have in terms of the fiscal policies. And then again, we are able to deal with some other issues like the monetary issues that Nigeria has in itself. You'll be able to encourage the right set of investors into the sector and would see things turning around.
Right. And according to the Minister of State for Petroleum, Oil, Mr. Heineken, Senator Heineken Lokobiri, said some South Korean investors are planning about 4 Nigerian refineries, at this time. And he also talked about investments around the range of about $50 billion or so that's supposed to come in to this oil and gas industry. So, it sounds good and all of that, but what should the government be doing right now to actually make this a reality and making this refining market attractive for investments?
From the fiscal point of view, I think that we see that a lot has been done. So many things have been put in place, whether it's with respect to gas investment or deep offshore investment. There are a lot of sweeteners already in terms of the fiscal incentives that you see. But again, we must step back and say, are the fiscals just enough? The speed to get regulatory approvals is very important. Sometimes it takes a very long time to get ministerial approval in itself. And of course, you would ask who is our minister for petroleum, right? So the process it takes, again, maybe because of all of the people who are like in between that process in terms of mediators of that process, they make it too long to ensure that ministerial approval is obtained for investments that people want to do in the sector when you're transferring from one operator to another. That has to be sped up in some way. And government doesn't have to just say that we will do it. They must demonstrate it. They must throw their weight behind whatever investments or investors that are willing to put something into that sector. And again, transparency must be made very clear. And it's not just as though people must be transparent or the government should be transparent, but they must be seen to be transparent. when you say people are bidding for certain assets, you must ensure that in that case, you make it very clear. These are the financials, these are the expertise, this is the history, this is the trajectory that the investor or the potential investors have demonstrated, and we see that this would give us a better deal. They are going to get to market very quickly, and so that's the basis for which we're choosing them. So all of that is very important. I think that the trust deficit that is within the sector needs to be brought back, it needs to be repaired, and we need to bring trust for governments and the policies, and that we will not have policy somersaults down the line. Those are very important beyond whatever you see in terms of the fiscal incentives. Like I said again, the monetary policies are also very important because people want to put their money in and they want to be sure that they can take it back without much hassle. So a couple of things to consider indeed.
Right, and looking at where we are right now with energy prices, it almost seems like you just expect prices will go up again, at some point. We're seeing that happening right now with PMS selling above 1,000 naira in some areas. So how long will this continue in your view?
It's unpredictable, I would say. But again, the sort of thing that we should expect in Nigeria is energy security. And we should be energy secure. Why? Because we produce the crude, right? If you produce the crude, if you look at what happens in Saudi Arabia, for instance, if you see what happens in the United States of America, because they produce crude, they get it for less in terms of the petroleum, motor spirit, or every other refined products that you get from crude. Right, they get it for less compared to other countries where they don't produce, and that's the sort of competitive advantage that we should have. So Dangote refinery, for instance, good enough, 650,000 barrels per day to deal with. Can it get the resource without going outside of Nigeria? If that happens, then we are getting more energy secure in Nigeria. It means that we can supply the crude to Dangote, and we can expect that we take a lot of arbitrage or logistics cost and all of those things that would make the price, the landing cost, to be so high for us in Nigeria. And so that's the point that we should really be making, and that's the way we should be going in Nigeria to ensure that we are self-sufficient, we are self-dependent in Nigeria for energy, rather than go elsewhere to source for these things. But
right.
Again, when you think about the pricing, the geopolitical issues are still right there. The Libyan crisis has not ended. The Russian-Ukraine has not ended. Iran is dealing with Israel and all of those. So those issues are still there. And there is very little that we can do about that as a country.
Right. I guess we need to stop acting like an oil importing country at some point. Well, thank you so much, Temitope Kolade, Senior Manager, Oil and Gas Power at Anderson. It was great having your perspective today.
Thanks, Ladi, for having me.